Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Getting Started with Data-Driven Creative. My name is Lisa, and I am Head of Marketing. I have a couple things to take you through today before we get started. Primarily, just to let you know from a housekeeping point of view, today's session is going to run about 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat over to your right. And we are also recording today's session, so you will receive a copy of it if you need to leave for any reason or would like to share it with your colleagues. I'd also like to take a moment to introduce you to our speaker today, Anna Jorysz, who's Head of Performance Display. Anna is incredibly talented and has helped the company win 8 major awards last year for her work with Liverpool FC. She was also listed in the top 50 industry players by Performance In. And I hope I haven't embarrassed you too much, Anna, but I am now going to pass it over to you to get started on your presentation.
Thank you, and thanks guys for tuning in for this. I'm just going to jump straight in and just go through briefly what I want to cover in this session. Essentially, I just want to sort of go over what data-driven creative is, or what I think it is, and where you can kind of get started with it. I think there's a lot of confusion often around how difficult it can be, or perhaps what the benefits are. I think in both cases. So I want to start with from the basics. What is it? Why should you be doing it? And then have a look at how you might approach doing it yourself. So looking at how you design your strategy, and then just a few things you might want to take into account when you're looking to get started. So in terms of introducing you to data-driven creative, I think everyone knows these days that we're being encouraged to do it. I don't think that goes without saying. There's plenty of stats out there. There's the old one about 70% of performance is down to creative, and I think it's only about 10% of our budget goes towards creative work. A lot of advertisers are saying that they want to really scale out their creative, what they're doing with it. They're saying the messaging is more important than ever, and yet we're still not seeing the take up on data-driven creative that maybe we should be. And I think part of the reason for that is it's a very broad term, and I think there's a lot of associations with it that can sometimes be quite off-putting for various reasons. A lot of people, I think, associate data-driven creative very heavily with dynamic retargeting ads, particularly the sort you get within sort of e-commerce, the product ads that follow you around with the thing you bought and you don't even like that much, and they're still following you a year later. And I think, that there's been enough press, enough talk about the negative experience that customers have with that I think sometimes that can be quite off-putting. And there's a lot of associations with really not very sort of brand aligned creative that doesn't look very attractive, that isn't very engaging, and that is annoying customers rather than actually getting to convert. I think on the other end you have the people who see it as being very heavy on the AI, the machine learning, and just being frankly out of reach. There's a lot of talk about dynamic creative optimization and massive platforms and huge algorithms taking in a million different variants and lots of data. I think sometimes that can seem, if you're working with a relatively small budget, that can seem a bit off-putting itself. And then I think also some people associate it with the death of creativity. They see it, oh, well, the robots are designing the creatives now. We don't want creators that like that. I don't think that's fair either. But the way I would define data-driven creative is like this. I'd say that data-driven creative is an approach to creative strategy that aims to deliver improved campaign performance through personalization of ads using data to make decisions. I think some people might disagree with how I've defined that, but what is important to me is that it's not actually about the technology. Yes, to implement it and to implement it well, you inevitably have to have the technology in place. You're often talking about having special platforms. Yes, sometimes about the AI and the machine learning, but that's not really what it's about. To me, what it's about is having that approach to optimizing your creative, to making your decisions within your creative, and to making them relevant to your customers. So that being the case, I don't think it's unreasonable to put it on a spectrum that starts way down at the bottom with simple manual A/B tests. Anything where you're doing a test, to work out what works best for your creative, that is data-driven. Anything where you're looking at your audiences, segmenting it out, and manually choosing different creators with different audiences, that is still, to some degree, data-driven. The problem is scaling it up from there, and that's where we start to get into the implementation of the technology. So you start getting into the realm of DCO with your dynamic creative optimization. And those who are able to take it all the way, who have the scale to do that, yes, it does get into that very kind of full-on artificial intelligence sort of area where the creative is very much running itself. But there's a huge scope in the middle for brands of all sizes, with all sorts of different goals to make some progress and to really see some good results from it. So why is data-driven creative important? I think there's sort of three main areas that are worth covering off here. The first is around user experience. I mean, I would hope this would go without saying that happy customers, is what a brand should always want. Again, at the performance end of the funnel, you'd expect to see, customers engaging with your ads, going on to convert more, and getting better results that way. And then from a brand point of view, obviously, the more customers associate your ads with a positive experience, the better that is in the long run. And I think as a display practitioner myself, what's also important is what it does for sort of the industry as a whole. I think there's a lot of lost consumer confidence in display. You see that around the privacy conversations, the ad blockers, brand safety. And the more you can show that you're trying to provide a positive experience rather than being in any way spammy or sort of inserting yourself where you're not wanted, I think that can only do all of us good as well. And again, looking long term, hopefully that gets engagement with ads back up a little bit. Then, of course, there's the efficiency side of things, and this comes again in various different forms. There's the simple efficiency of saving money. The more dynamic you go with your creative strategy, the more money you save in terms of having to constantly sort of push out updates to your creators just for the sake of changing a price or changing an offer code. So that there's a direct saving there. Also in terms of media spend, of course, because it means you don't have to waste money showing messages to people who aren't going to be interested in it if you can get your relevance right. And also in terms of time, the amount of time spent building the creators, pushing them out, and then also all the trafficking and all of that side. That all takes a lot of time that really doesn't need to be going that way. The other way where you get a lot of efficiency from the creative is through more rigorous testing. It's perfectly possible to do very good creative tests with a set of static banners, but the chances of getting really good results out of that and be able to test multiple things at once is a lot harder. There's a lot more variance you have to produce on a more regular basis, and realistically, we don't see many brands doing that. What dynamic creative gives you the opportunity to do is really actually rigorously test, run through a load of variants, test them against each other in completely fair circumstances, and get results out a lot more quickly than you would by doing it manually. So again, there's more efficiencies and savings to be had there. And then, of course, all of that leads to better performance. Anything that saves on spend, anything that improves user experience is going to have a knock-on effect on performance. And again, as I was saying, this very much applies at sort of all ends of the funnel, whether that be your brand perception that you're trying to improve or simply your ROI. There should always be a benefit to having that positive creative. But how do you get to a point where you are having that effect? Because I think, as I say, you look at the case studies that get pulled out as being sort of examples of what everyone should be doing, and actually they are quite complicated. It's not something you can dive straight into. And I think this is something we don't generally encourage ourselves. It's very much see it as a journey. Different brands are at different places, but we always want to encourage you, along that route. So I think the first place you start is just by, if you haven't already, by shifting into sort of the rich media space. Beyond sort of your simple A/B testing of your static banners, to be able to scale it at all, you have to start looking at HTML. So you start investigating in that. Again, whether you're doing this through a production house, a creative agency, in-house, you just need to have access to that developer resource. And what that does is it opens a lot of doors for you as well down the line in terms of what you're able to track and the insight you're able to get into how people are engaging with your banners as well. Once you've got those, you can start looking at sort of the dynamic implementation. So looking at adopting just basic dynamic rules, which again leads to a lot of those efficiencies, even if it's as simple as the fact that you can now update a spreadsheet instead of having to create a whole new set of static banners. You're already starting to gain, and you're working with these simple dynamic templates. And from then, it's just a case of layering in more and more data, essentially, and more smarts. So then you might start looking at your performance activation. So looking at the data you're getting from your creative. Again, where we're talking conversions, where we're talking revenue, this is really quite easy to see how this works. But again, there's no reason this can't apply further up the funnel as well. You could look at your engagements, you can look at time spent on site, having seen ads. There's all sorts of metrics you can be optimizing towards. As a case of putting that back into your banners, and you really starting to build that into your algorithm. So instead of just setting something based on what's the most recent update, you're really starting to look at what's going to perform best for this segment. And then you want to look at expanding that data out. So looking at maybe broader performance data, so what's going on other channels, what's happening in your business as a whole, or maybe looking at kind of external environmental factors as well that could drive customers' purchase decisions, and trying to integrate all of that in. And so again, in your sort of ideal world, you're getting to this point where everything that could possibly be affecting your creative is being taken into account. And obviously, you don't want to go straight in at that point, because you're not going to know what that is at this stage, and how to approach it. It's something you want to build up to gradually with learnings over time. In terms of sort of the basic underpinnings of all of this, it's really simple. I think a lot of people are always very keen to show off their technology. A lot of people have very sort of fancy platforms that will do all sorts of things for you, but actually don't explain what's going on in the background. Essentially, the way any dynamic creative works is you have a template, and that's made up of all the things that you're used to seeing. So in terms of the content, it can also include things like style elements as well. And then in the back end of that, you have a feed. And all this does is matches up all the different variations of content to the different elements that you can target by. So whether this be audience segments, locations, devices, whatever it is, you're just matching up the possible combinations of those two elements. And when the creative serves, it then runs through a filtering process and finds the rows in the feed that match what it wants to show based on what it knows about the person who is at the other end of the ad. Where the complexity comes is then in the kind of that selection process. And that's made up of a combination of usually of rules and weightings. So the rules can generally be defined in terms of how you want to approach it. So maybe, it's more important to you what country they're in rather than what audience they're in. And then the weightings is where you start to build in your algorithms in terms of prioritizing different variations for different audiences for different times of day, whatever it might be. And this is then really where you're getting into the meat of your optimization. And so when we talk about sort of defining your dynamic strategy, this is sort of the area we're sitting and starting to think about how you want to tie the different bits of copy, of imagery, or whatever it is back to what you know about those people you're serving the ads to. So how do you go about designing your strategy? Essentially, we see it very much as an iterative process. I think any data-led mindset always has to be iterative like this. You take your insight, you push it into your design process, to your ideation process, but it's really important that you get data back out. So it's really important that as part of that process, you're thinking about what you're measuring, how you're going to learn from it, and how you're going to move forward with it. It's also really important that all your stakeholders are involved at all stages of the process. Again, there's some that are more obvious perhaps than others, but you need someone from the brand involved. You probably have your brand manager, a digital marketer, whoever sits across the channels that you're building the creative for. And then there's the two sides of the creative. There's the designers, the copywriters, the strategists who sit on kind of the pure creative side. And then you've got your development and your production as well. And these are the ones who will be doing a lot of the work in terms of building the feeds, building the algorithms behind it. And then you've got your media team. And I've actually, you didn't see the split out a lot, but I think it is important to split out. You've got your media planners, your account managers, your buyers. And then your ad ops team is really critical as well. Again, depending what platform you're working out, how mature your programmatic campaigns are, this may vary whether that is sort of a separate team in and of itself, but it's really important that you have that expertise there to support. And just to sort of emphasize that point as well, because I think this is really important, is that you really need to have your media and creative teams working hand in hand. They should be sharing the data. They should be planning together. And that goes both ways. It means the creatives knowing what media is being bought, how to support that, but also the media planners planning around the specific creative messaging that is going out there, looking at how you integrate the performance across both, and actually how you come up with an overall optimization approach that really takes everything into account. So in terms of that optimization cycle, we really want to focus on the data side of it for the purposes of this. So looking at how we gather data, develop the strategy, and plan the measurement. But it's worth noting that actually some of the other things, sometimes require a bit of a shift from creative teams as well. You have to be a lot more flexible with your designs when you're looking at kind of these still potentially being running 6 months down the line with who knows what copy. You have to think a lot more carefully about making it work across devices and across campaigns and so on. And of course, as I mentioned, the trafficking process potentially looks quite different as well. So it's important that your ad ops team still remain involved as well. But in terms of where you start, so start with gathering data. So here you just want to get together a whole list of all the data you have access to that could come into play. So I tend to split into 5 areas. You've got your audience, which is your demographic data, third-party data, any first-party data, be that CRM list, pixel-based list, and so on. You have your media. So this is tied to the media plan. So what sites are you showing on? What pages? What's the content about? Is there any first-party data from the publisher that you can get hold of and can be passed to you? Then you have your external environmental data. So this could be as simple as day of the week, time of day. It could be around the technology, so the device and the environment, or it could be, broader. It could be around what's going on in the world. Is someone talking about your product on Twitter? Our competitors suddenly dropped all their prices. Is that something you need to react to, and so on? And then you've got your internal data. So this is the information you know about your business. So maybe it's around product performance and price changes. Maybe it's about seasonal trends. Maybe what's around the corner. How do you account for that in your creative? And then you've got the creative data itself. So things like dimensions, and you've got your interactions, engagements that you can start tracking. And this data is used for 3 things, I would say, really. Firstly, for getting insights that you can feed into your planning process. Then as factors you can actually target on. And then optimizing, so how you segment your data out and optimize it once you're up and running. So I wanted to give an example of where we've used this. Lisa's already mentioned that we've got experience in the football space, so I'm sticking with that for this. So this was a campaign that we ran around launching new kit. This is sort of the process we went through in terms of gathering that data. So on the insight side, we got some media data. We looked at which types of site were doing well. And we looked at the fact that content around a specific topic generally performed better in terms of engagement than ones that were a bit broader. We saw that there were lower bounce rates and higher order values for customers who used the kit personalization widget that was available on site. And we also knew that the better a football player is performing, the more popular they are, the more quickly their kit sells. So these are all factors we want to take into account in our planning process. And it's also stuff we could then factor into how we wanted to personalize. So the fact that we were seeing much better results on that specific content made we wanted to make sure our ads were as relevant to that content as possible. We obviously knew that we wanted to be able to tailor what we were doing to the user's behavior as much as possible on the audience side. And we wanted to be able to pull in that performance data and build that into our algorithm as well. And then from the optimization point of view, obviously we could track conversions, and that was kind of the key goal of this campaign. But we also wanted to look at our engagement in CTR, because certain elements of that we would expect to see more in terms of the traffic they drive would be where the greater impact is, rather than necessarily on the conversion rate once they got to site. And then in terms of developing a strategy, I think we're all subject to bias and confirmation bias as well. And I know I'm certainly guilty of this. I come up with a great idea that I'm sure will work, and I just go for it. But I think it's really important that actually, while we don't downplay the importance of instinct and human understanding, that actually we build it on really solid foundations, because what we want to know is whether it worked or not, whether we should do it again, whether we should learn from it. So it's really important to start with the foundations in terms of data. So what are the goals and KPIs of your campaign? And with that in mind, how do you want to segment out your audiences, and how can you do that? Then once you've got that foundation in place, you can then go on to think about how you want to vary the messaging. So what does each of those audience segments care about? How might they respond to different types of creative? And what message do you want to communicate to each of them? And again, to show how we applied this, we had all that and we worked out an approach based on how we knew we wanted to segment our audiences. So we first looked at, as we mentioned, the player form. So this was our first source of data. We then pulled in audience data around both search history and on-site behavior as well. So again, all of this is based on insight that we had got from our campaigns. We then wanted to put in that contextual element, so making sure that we were as relevant to content that we knew our audience was reading as possible. And then overall, we just wanted to make sure the user experience was as good as possible. So we wanted to build an element of continuity so that each ad would pick up where it had previously left off. So once you design the strategy, you then, as I say, you need to know whether it will work, and you want to know how you're going to improve it. How are you going to optimize it? So what you need to do is think about building in hypotheses right into the design that will enable optimization. So what are you trying to prove or even disprove, and how are you going to measure that? And some things that you really need to consider with this are what KPIs best represent success. So as I was saying, for some campaigns or even some elements that maybe you're testing, your final campaign goal isn't always the best. If what you're trying to do is get more sales by driving more people to site, maybe sometimes looking at that click-through rate, for instance, might be the best way to go. Then have a think about how you actually need to structure the media campaign behind it to make sure you're getting the insight you need. Again, this is where you need that collaboration with the media team. And think carefully about actually how much you can test at once. If you're running a relatively low budget or low volume campaign, there's no point trying to test every single color call to action under the sun. It's not going to get you good results. You need to think about statistical significance. And then most importantly, you need to think, how will this be actionable? What will I learn from this? How will I build this either into direct optimization of the units or into my subsequent campaigns? So again, we'd run that here. We ran a relatively simple A/B test with a cookie split. And had it been a longer running campaign, we'd very much, the next step would have been to start, once we know the algorithm works, how do we then develop that algorithm further and further, and always having that A against B to keep improving what we're doing. So in terms of just a few considerations to think when you're getting started, I think first of all is do bear in mind what channels and formats you're working on, because these do obviously have different limitations. Social and native to some extent are very tied to the platforms they're on and the publishers who are serving them, so there can be limitations. Although, of course, the likes of Facebook have their own solutions in place as well. Video isn't always truly dynamic. So again, think about what it is you're actually doing. You're effectively spitting out a lot of different variations on the fly, but that can have an impact on the strategy. Whereas the display side, which is sort of where I tend to focus myself, obviously has so many options. And actually that can be as much of a problem as anything else in terms of the variety of technologies that are out there and available for you to use. And of course, it's really important that whatever channels you're running, you keep synergies across it. In terms of all those platforms, I've thrown a lot of logos that you may or may not recognize down the side. I know it can be pretty daunting to start. I think that you just have to, this is something that's very difficult to advise on. It's something that's got to go brand by brand, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But things that will come into it will be your current technical setup. So what platforms they integrate with the DSP that you're using. What in-house resource do you have? Can you develop yourself, or do you need support on that? And in general, what level of service do these provide? Some of them are self-serve platforms. Some have whole design teams there at your service to help out. What they're compatible with in terms of formats, and how easy is it, for the agencies you might work with to work with these providers as well. Do they have existing relationships in place? They already have experience with certain platforms. And then the other thing is what kind of strategy you're running and how bespoke that needs to be, and which platforms can offer that. And of course, all of this inevitably you have to set up again twice. And then just sort of my last thing that I think you need to be thinking about when you set off on this journey is really around how do you show it's worth it. Sometimes it can be quite significant upfront cost, and you're not going to get it right straight away unless you're lucky. So first of all, manage expectations. Don't expect it to suddenly make display your top performance driving channel. That's not likely to happen. Make sure you're being realistic both with yourself and with stakeholders within your business. Look for ways you can demonstrate quick wins. So even if that is, look, we've saved so much money this month, I'm not having to create new static units. Show how you can demonstrate quick value from it, and then look for how it's helping from a broader point of view as well. Are you gaining insight from it that you wouldn't otherwise have had in terms of how your users interact, for instance, within kind of your branding campaigns, what really appeals to your customers? So just in terms of sort of a few tips to sort of sum up what I've talked about there, I think first of all, start small and keep it measurable. Don't try and aim for the star straight away. That will not only be quite off-putting and terrifying, but also it won't be effective. You need to learn as you go. But do design for growth. I'd be inclined to say run always on campaigns, but I know obviously that's not always practical. But always think about what is the next step in your optimization, in your learning cycle. And make sure you always align the data signals you use with your business goals. So overall, just make sure you're being really flexible with your strategy and that you can really develop it as you go. And then also just make sure you understand the resources that are available to you. Don't overstretch yourself on that. Keep your messaging clear and concise at all times. Just because you're complicating on the data side doesn't mean you should be complicating the user experience. And of course, making sure you're not crossing the line from being relevant and personalized to being creepy. There's plenty of data out there that doesn't involve showing someone exactly what they've just been doing on your website. And again, just make sure you're always putting the user experience first throughout the whole process. And that's me, thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Anna. As Anna mentioned, if you have any questions, now is the time to put them in the chat function. But whilst we wait for those to come in, Anna, if anybody has any questions about how they can improve their personal creatives for their brand or company, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
We're actually shortly releasing a new audit service for free, where we're happy to take a look at your creators for you. I think details for that are probably on the website. But yeah, what we do there is just take a look at a few units, give some feedback, and also have a look at overall strategy. But I think there's so many case studies out there as well that you can look at of brands that are doing really interesting things. And I know whenever I look at that, I'm always coming up with new ideas. So that's always just worth having a look through as well, I think.
Amazing. And as Anna mentioned, with that new audit service that we are sending out, we will include any links in the follow-up email as well as the link to this video. We've had a question come in from Max. His question is there any way I can leverage more lifestyle influencer content in my strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes back to what I was talking about around making the synergies as well. Social can sometimes be a bit limited in terms of the access you get, and display can be a great way of taking that content and spreading out to a wider audience. We've looked at different approaches to that, and one thing that we've done is kind of building an automated link between social platforms and display that pulls your content through in a relatively automated way and optimizes based on that. So that's one approach. But obviously, influencers create so much great content. There's all sorts of different things you can be doing with it.
We are shortly running out of time, so if there are any questions that I haven't gotten to, we will answer them in the email follow-up. Also, Anna, I believe you're holding a training in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I don't think the dates have been confirmed, but yeah, just going over sort of in I think 3 sessions, just going into some of this in a bit more detail and really trying to get people started with some practical advice on how to go about getting started with data-driven creative. So hopefully it will be really useful.
And we are able to offer anybody who attended our webinar today a 15% off with the code IGNITE15. that will also be in the email follow-up. But thank you so much, Anna, for your time today, and thank you to everybody who was able to join us. We really appreciate having you here, and I hope you found this interesting. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.